She actually deserves a beautiful wedding." My father laughed when he said it, sliding the deed to my dream venue across the table, the same venue I had paid a $14,250 deposit on 6 weeks before he ever breathed a word to my sister. I sat there while 200 people raised their glasses. I didn't say a word. I set down my fork, stepped outside, and called the venue owner from the parking lot. What happened when 47 guests opened the same message the next morning ended 3 relationships my father had spent years protecting. The proof was already forwarded. 1 payment record, 1 signed contract, 1 name. Mine. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now let me take you back to the night my father first asked how much I'd put down on that venue and said, "Your sister's engagement is going to be something this family actually celebrates." My name is Maya. I'm 29 years old, and I'm an architect. I build structures designed to withstand pressure, but I spent most of my life letting my family erode my foundation. In our house, there was one unspoken law. My success was a family resource, but my sister Chloe's comfort was a family priority. If I won a scholarship, the money was freed up for Chloe's summer camp. If I got a promotion, it meant I could finally afford to buy the big Christmas gifts so my parents could focus on Chloe's car payment. I'm the workhorse. Chloe is the prize. I spent 3 years working 60-hour weeks, taking on freelance drafting jobs at night, and skipping vacations to save for the one thing I wanted for myself. My wedding. I didn't want my father's money. I knew the price of his checks. They always came with strings that eventually turned into nooses. My fiancé, Leo, and I wanted something that belonged only to us. We chose Highbridge Estate. It's an old limestone manor with floor-to-ceiling windows that look out over the valley. It's expensive, it's exclusive, and the waiting list is a year long. 6 weeks ago, I sat in the estate's office and opened my laptop. My hands were shaking slightly as I authorized the transfer. $14,250. It was the largest single payment I had ever made. Elias, the venue owner's son, was the one who processed the paperwork. He's a pragmatic guy, maybe a few years older than me, with the kind of no-nonsense attitude you only get from running a high-stakes event space. He looked at my organized folders and the precise way I'd highlighted the contract terms. "You're the most prepared bride I've seen all year, Maya," he said, handing me the receipt. "The date is yours, December 12th. I walked out of that office feeling like I was finally standing on my own 2 feet. That night, Leo and I sat on our tiny apartment balcony. We didn't have fancy crystal, so we drank cheap champagne out of coffee mugs. "We did it," Leo said, clinking his mug against mine. "No family drama, no guilt trips, just us." "It's ours," I whispered. "They can't touch this." I should have known better. In my family, ours is a dangerous word. My father, Richard, is a man who builds his identity on being the provider, the patriarch, the one who makes things happen. He's a businessman who specializes in strategic partnerships, which is just a fancy way of saying he moves people around like chess pieces. My mother, Helen, is the one who polishes the board. She spends her life smoothing over the jagged edges of my father's temper so he stays calm. A week after I booked Highbridge, my mother called me. "Maya, honey, try not to talk too much about the wedding at Sunday dinner," she said. Her voice had that thin, breathless quality it gets when she's nervous. "Chloe is feeling a bit behind, you know how she is. She's still struggling with her freelance design business, and seeing you so far ahead is hard for her." "I'm not ahead, Mom," I said. "I'm working. I've been saving for 3 years." I know, but just be the bigger person. For me, being the bigger person, was the role I'd been cast in since I was 6. It meant shrinking so Chloe could feel tall. At dinner that Sunday, my father was unusually attentive. He kept refilling my wine glass, asking about the estate. Highbridge, he mused, leaning back in his upholstered chair at the head of the table. Top-tier choice, Maya, very impressive. They require a substantial commitment up front, don't they? They do, I said, keeping my answers short. And you handled that all on your own, no financing. Every cent, I said. He nodded, a slow, calculating movement. Good, that's my girl. Independent. I've always admired that about you. He reached out and patted my hand. It was a warmth beat I hadn't felt in years, and for a second I let myself believe it was real. I let myself think that maybe, for once, he was proud of me for being a daughter, not just a backup plan. Exactly how much did you put down on that Highbridge place again? He asked, his voice casual, almost bored. I told him. I thought I was sharing a milestone. I didn't realize I was giving him the appraisal for his next acquisition. The engagement party for Chloe was held at a private club downtown, a place where the air smells like expensive gin and old money. My father had spent weeks curating the guest list, ensuring every one of his major investors and business rivals would be in the room to witness the perfection of his favorite daughter's union. I wore a dark green dress I'd bought on sale, something professional but muted. I knew my role. I was the backdrop. I spent the first hour circulating the room, shaking hands with men in charcoal suits who only remembered me as the architect daughter, while Chloe stood in the center of the room under a spotlight, wearing a white silk dress that probably cost more than my first car. The dinner was elaborate, 5 courses, silver service, and a level of tension that only my family can produce. I sat at a side table near the kitchen doors, while my parents and Chloe's new fiancé sat at the head table on a raised dais. Midway through the dessert course, my father stood up. He tapped his spoon against his crystal glass, the sharp ring cutting through the chatter of 200 people. "Friends, colleagues," he began, his voice booming with that practiced, benevolent warmth. "We are here to celebrate a beginning. My Chloe has always been the heart of this family. She's a dreamer, an artist, and she deserves a life as beautiful as she is." He looked toward our table, and for a split second his eyes locked onto mine. There was no warmth there. There was a challenge. "I know many of you have heard about the Highbridge estate," he continued. A murmur went through the room. Highbridge was the kind of name that carried weight in these circles. It's a difficult venue to secure, but today, as a surprise for my daughter, I'm making it official. He reached into his breast pocket and pulled out a thick, cream-colored envelope. He slid it across the table toward Chloe. "The deed to the venue," he said, his voice loud enough to reach the back of the room. "The deposit is paid. The date is locked. December 12th, because Chloe actually deserves a beautiful wedding." The room erupted. People stood up, clapping, cheering at the grandeur of the gift. Chloe was crying, throwing her arms around my father's neck, whispering how much she loved him. My mother was beaming, her hands clasped to her chest as if she'd just witnessed a miracle. I felt the air leave my lungs. December 12th. My date. My $14,250. He hadn't just stolen the venue. He had used my own money to buy the applause of the room, all while branding me as someone who didn't deserve the very thing I had built. He was sliding a forged transfer deed, something he'd likely mocked up in his office, across a table to a girl who hadn't worked a day in her life. "Maya," a voice whispered next to me. It was Leo. He was staring at the head table, his jaw so tight I thought his teeth might crack. "Did he just?" "He did," I said. My voice sounded like it was coming from a long way away. I looked at my father. He was laughing now, shaking hands with Arthur, his lead investor. He looked over at me and gave a small, mocking shrug, as if to say, "What are you going to do about it?" I didn't scream. I didn't make a scene. That's what he wanted, for me to look like the jealous, unstable sister so he could further justify his rescue of the venue. I simply set down my fork. The silver hit the china with a quiet clink. I stood up, walked past the cheering rows of relatives, and stepped out into the cold, damp air of the parking lot. I walked until I reached the edge of the asphalt, where the noise of the party was just a dull hum. I pulled my phone from my clutch. My fingers were cold, but they didn't shake this time. I dialed the emergency after-hours number for Highbridge Estate. "Elias," I said when he picked up on the third ring. "It's Maya. I need you to listen very carefully. My father is in a room with 200 people telling them he owns my wedding date. I need to know exactly what's happening on your end." Maya. Elias sounded confused, then sharp. "Wait, someone just tried to log into your portal 5 minutes ago from an unrecognized IP. I'm looking at the security flag right now." That was the first crack. My father hadn't just lied to the room, he was actively trying to hack into my life while I was still sitting at his table. "Don't let them in," I said, watching my breath fog in the night air. "And Elias, whatever happens next, do not answer any calls from my father's office." "I've got the logs, Maya," he said, his voice dropping into that low, professional tone. "He's trying to change the billing contact. He's using a credit card under a business name I don't recognize." "Keep it all," I said. "Every timestamp, every failed password." I hung up and looked back at the glowing windows of the club. I could see the silhouette of my father, the king of the room, holding a glass of scotch and basking in the lie. I didn't go back inside. I walked to my car and sat in the dark, waiting for the first wave of the counterattack I knew was coming. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in my car until the club lights went dark and the valet stand was packed away, watching my father's black SUV pull out of the lot with the smug authority of a tank. By morning, I knew the ceasefire was over. I went into my home office, pulled the physical Highbridge contract from my firebox, and felt the weight of the paper, real, tangible proof that my life wasn't a gift my father could hand out. The first blow landed at 8:15 a.m. It wasn't my father. It was my mother. She didn't lead with a greeting. She led with a sob. "Maya, how could you? Your father is in such a state. He's been on the phone since 6 o'clock trying to fix whatever mess you made with the venue staff." "I didn't make a mess, Mom," I said, my voice flat. I was looking at the $14,250 line item on my bank statement. "He lied. He told 200 people he bought my wedding venue for Chloe. He tried to hack my account." "He was trying to surprise her," she wailed. "He was going to pay you back, Maya, eventually. He just needed to make the announcement last night for the investors, Arthur and the others. They value family. They value a patriarch who provides." "Your father already promised them a tour of the estate next week. You can't embarrass him like this. You have to sign the transfer papers." "I'm not signing anything. That's my wedding, Mom, my date." "Chloe needs this more than you do." The mask slipped then. My mother's voice went sharp, the desperation of the enforcer coming through. "You're strong, Maya. You're successful. You have your career. Chloe has nothing. This wedding is her chance to finally feel special. If you don't sign those papers, you aren't just hurting your father's business, you're destroying your sister's happiness. Is that who you are? A selfish girl who cares more about a deposit than her own blood?" I hung up. My stomach felt like it was full of wet sand. 10 minutes later, the heavy artillery arrived. My father didn't call. He sent a formal email to my work address, CCing my boss at the architecture firm. The subject line was, "Family Matter/Professional Conduct." The email was a masterpiece of corporate gaslighting. He claimed that I had mismanaged family funds entrusted to me for a joint venture, and that my instability was threatening a major development project he was consulting on with my firm's biggest client. It was a clear, calculated threat. Sign the venue over, or I'll make sure you never design a doghouse in this city again. He ended the email with, I expect the sign transfer by 5:00 p.m. Don't be a martyr, Maya. It doesn't suit your brand. I was still staring at the screen, trying to breathe when the second wave hit. My phone started buzzing, notifications from my wedding planning app, one after another like a series of small explosions. Cancellation confirmed, Petals and Pine Floristry. Cancellation confirmed, Hearth and Table Catering. Cancellation confirmed, Silver Lens Photography. I scrambled to open the app. All my vendors, the ones I'd spent months vetting, the ones who held my vision for the day, were gone. I called the florist immediately. I'm so sorry, Maya, Sarah, the owner, said. She sounded genuinely distressed. A man calling from your father's office contacted us this morning. He said the wedding was being restructured and that you were moving to a smaller, private ceremony out of state. He had your file number. He said you were too overwhelmed to call yourself. Sarah, that wasn't me. I didn't authorize. I know, honey, but he's Richard Vance. He's done work for our building's landlord. He told me if I didn't process the cancellation immediately, there would be issues with my lease. I've already filled your slot. I can't take you back. I sat back in my chair, the silence of the room ringing in my ears. He hadn't just tried to take the venue. He was dismantling the entire day piece by piece. He was making me a ghost at my own wedding. He wanted me to feel the walls closing in. He wanted me to realize that in his world, my signatures didn't matter, my money didn't matter, and my hard work was just a tool he could break if I didn't let him use it. I looked at the sent folder in my email. My father hadn't just destroyed my plans, he had tried to weaponize my career against me. He thought he had me in a corner. He thought that by noon, I'd be crying and begging for his forgiveness. But I hadn't checked my phone's private messages yet, and I didn't know that while my father was busy threatening my boss, he had forgotten one very important thing. I wasn't just his daughter. I was the person who had designed his office's digital filing system 3 years ago when he was too cheap to hire an IT firm. I knew exactly where he kept the strategic partnerships folder. By Wednesday, the silence in my apartment felt heavy, like it was pressing against my ribs. I had lost my venue, my vendors, and my father was actively trying to set fire to my reputation at the firm. I spent the afternoon sitting on my living room floor, surrounded by useless things. There were silk ribbon swatches in sunset peach and dusty rose, a stack of sample invitations I'd hand calligraphed, and a printed menu for a dinner that would never be served. In my family's eyes, I was a ghost. I had been erased from my own story so that Chloe could have a more convincing lead role. I felt small. I felt like the girl who used to hide in the pantry when my father's temper flared, hoping if I stayed quiet enough, I wouldn't be the next thing he decided to fix. The floor was cold. I pulled a lace sample toward me. It was supposed to be the overlay for the head table. Now, it just looked like an expensive cobweb. I realized then that my father hadn't just taken a building. He had taken the belief that I was allowed to have something that wasn't for sale to the highest bidder. I heard the door click. Leo walked in, his shoulders slumped, his tie pulled loose. He'd spent the day calling every other venue in a 50-mile radius, only to be told the same thing, we're booked through next year. He saw me on the floor and didn't say a word. He didn't tell me it was going to be okay. He didn't give me a motivational speech about being strong. He just sat down in the mess of fabric with me. He reached out and took the lace out of my hand, setting it aside. I called the courthouse this afternoon, he said quietly. I looked up, my eyes stinging. Leo, I'm so sorry. I wanted to give you the beautiful day. I wanted us to have that ballroom. Maya, look at me. He took my hands. His palms were warm and rough. I don't care if we get married in a courthouse, a library, or a Denny's parking lot. They can take the limestone. They can take the catering. but they don't get to take us. We are the only part of this that isn't for rent. For the first time in 3 days, the pressure in my chest eased. He wasn't looking at me like a resource or a failure. He was just looking at me. "We'll find a way," he whispered. "But we do it our way. No more trying to earn their seat at the table." I leaned my head against his shoulder. The warmth of that moment was a small light in a very dark week, a reminder of why I'd started this journey in the first place. I wasn't an architect just to build things for men like my father. I built things to create a home. My phone buzzed on the hardwood floor, the vibration rattling through my bones. It was a text from an unsaved number. "Your dad is in my lobby with a checkbook. Get down here, Elias." I stood up so fast the blood rushed from my head. My father wasn't just waiting for me to surrender. He was at the venue right now, trying to buy the final lock. I didn't drive to the venue. I couldn't. Before I could even reach my keys, I had to walk into the lion's den. It was the day of Chloe's emergency bridal shower, an event my mother had organized in 48 hours to solidify the transition of the venue. The air in my parents' neighborhood was thick with the scent of freshly cut grass and entitlement. As I pulled my car onto the curb, I saw the spatial hierarchy of my family on full display. My father's black SUV was parked dead center in the driveway. Chloe's convertible was angled right behind it. My mother had even moved the trash bins to the street to make room for her bridge club friends' Lexuses. I was relegated to parking 3 houses down, next to a fire hydrant. I walked toward the front door, my heels clicking on the pavement. I felt like a stranger approaching a fortress. Usually, I'd use my key, but today, the door was already propped open, as if to say the house was public property for everyone except me. The moment I stepped into the foyer, the sound of 30 women laughing dropped by half. It was a physical weight, that sudden silence. The contagion had already done its work. My father hadn't just stolen my money, he had rewritten my history. I saw my Aunt Martha first. She was a woman who lived for family gossip, her eyes always scanning for the weakest link. She walked over and patted my shoulder, not a hug, just a heavy, pitying tap. "It's okay to scale down, sweetie," she whispered, her breath smelling of mimosas. "Your father told us everything. The economy is hard on architects right now. There's no shame in admitting you were always a bit too ambitious for your own good. It's a blessing Chloe can step in and save the deposit." "I'm not broke, Martha," I said, my voice tight. "And I didn't admit anything." She just sighed, that infuriatingly patient sound you make at a child who's lying about a broken vase. "Pride is a lonely thing, Maya. Just be grateful your father is looking out for the family's reputation." I walked further into the living room. The seating arrangement was a power map. In the center, on the upholstered velvet armchairs, sat my mother, Chloe, and the wives of my father's 3 biggest investors. They were the inner circle, draped in floral silk and champagne. The back of the room was filled with folding chairs, the kind that bite into your thighs. That's where I was directed. My name tag was sitting on a card table near the kitchen door, right next to the teenage cousins who were more interested in their phones than the miracle of Chloe's wedding. "Oh, Maya, you made it," Chloe called out from her throne. She didn't get up, she just waved a manicured hand. "Isn't it wonderful? Dad said the Highbridge estate has such a better flow for my personality. He said your style was always a little too cold for that ballroom." A ripple of polite, cruel laughter went through the room. My mother didn't look at me. She was busy showing Arthur's wife a photo of the transfer deed my father had mocked up. "Richard is so generous," a family friend remarked loud enough for me to hear. "Bailing Maya out of that financial mess and still making sure the family gets to keep the date. Most fathers would have just let her fail." The lie was a living thing now. It was in the way they looked at my shoes, the way they spoke over me as if I were a ghost, and the way they praised my father for the very theft that was bleeding me dry. I didn't sit down. I stood by the kitchen door, watching the women celebrate a wedding built on my exhaustion. I watched my mother slide a plate of appetizers toward Chloe while ignoring my empty hands. I was the help again, the one who provided the stage but wasn't allowed to stand on it. Then I heard it. One of the investors' wives, a woman named Mrs. Sterling, leaned in toward my mother. Arthur is so looking forward to the venue tour on Friday. He says Richard's commitment to legacy is why he's moving forward with the merger. A man who provides for his daughters is a man he can trust with his capital. My heart stopped. The venue tour. Friday. My father wasn't just giving Chloe a wedding. He was using my $14,250 ballroom as a prop to close a multi-million-dollar business deal. He was selling my dream to buy his next level of power. I looked at my phone. The screen was still glowing with Elia's text. "Your dad is in my lobby with a checkbook." I didn't say goodbye. I didn't wait for the cake. I turned around and walked out the door, leaving the pitying stares and the folding chairs behind. I had seen enough of their system. It was time to show them mine. As I reached my car, I realized that while my father had the room, I had the record. And Arthur, the man who valued trust, was about to get an education in how Richard Vance actually treats the people under his roof. I drove to Highbridge Estate with my heart hammering against my ribs. The sun was setting, casting long, sharp shadows across the limestone driveway. This was the place where I was supposed to start my life, and right now it was a crime scene. I walked into the lobby and saw them. My father was standing by the mahogany reception desk, looking every bit the high-powered executive. He had his leather checkbook open on the counter, a Mont Blanc pen poised in his hand. Elias was standing behind the desk, his arms crossed, his face a mask of polite but total refusal. "Richard, as I've already told you," Elias said, his voice carrying that low, rhythmic authority, "the contract is in Maya's name. Unless she is here to sign the release, I cannot accept your funds." "Don't be difficult, son," my father said, and I could hear the familiar gravel of his negotiation voice. "My daughter has had a bit of a breakdown. She's overwhelmed. I'm stepping in to ensure the family obligation is met. You want the venue filled, don't you? This check is for the full remaining balance." "The space is already paid for through the deposit," Elias replied, "and the contract owner is Maya Vance, not Vance Holdings." I stepped forward into the light of the chandelier. "He's right, Dad, put the pen away." My father turned. For a second, his face flickered with something like surprise, but it was quickly replaced by a cold, sharpened patronization. "Maya, you're making a scene. We're in a place of business." "No," I said, walking up to the desk. "You're in my place of business. This is the venue I booked, with my money. Money I allowed you to save by not charging you market-rate rent for the first year after college," he snapped, the mask finally slipping. "Every dollar you have is a result of my infrastructure. Now sign the release. Chloe is waiting, and I have investors who expect to see this venue on Friday. Don't be the reason this family loses everything." "Leave," I said. He stared at me, his eyes narrowing. He looked at Elias, then back at me. "You're making a very expensive mistake, Maya. Think about your future at the firm." He tucked his checkbook into his coat, gave Elias a look of pure contempt, and walked out. The heavy oak doors thudded shut behind him. The lobby went quiet. I felt like I was going to collapse. Elias didn't say, "I told you so," and he didn't ask me if I was okay. He just walked around the counter, went into the small office behind the desk, and came back with a steaming cup of coffee in a ceramic mug. "Sit down, Maya," he said, gesturing to a velvet bench. I sat. The coffee was hot and bitter, but it was the first thing that had tasted right all week. We sat in the quiet, empty ballroom for a moment, the moonlight hitting the polished floors. "My dad used to let rich guys walk all over him," Elias said quietly, leaning against a marble pillar. He thought that's how you stayed in business. I don't. I watched him lose his dignity a dozen times for the sake of a strategic partnership. The space is yours. It stays yours. He stood up and walked to the computer. Now let's look at what he actually did. Elias turned the monitor toward me. He had pulled up the server logs, the digital footprint of every attempt to access my account. He tried to log in 6 times using your old childhood zip code as a recovery password. When that failed, he tried to use his business credentials to override the administrative lock. He pointed to a specific line of code. But look here. He didn't just try to change the name. He tried to backdate a cancellation request from your email address. He was trying to create a paper trail that showed you gave it up weeks ago. He wanted to make it look like he was just picking up the pieces you dropped. He's trying to fraud his way into a deed, I whispered. He is, Elias said. And he's doing it because he told Arthur Sterling and the other investors that he already owned the place. He's leveraged his reputation on a lie, and he needs your signature to make the lie true. Elias hit print. The machine hummed, spitting out page after page of timestamps, IP addresses, and the failed login attempts. Your name is on every contract, Elias said, handing me the warm stack of paper. And now you have the proof that he tried to steal it. He looked me in the eye. He thinks he's the only one who knows how to use a paper trail. He's wrong. I took the logs. They felt like a shield. My father hadn't just left a trail, he had left a roadmap of his own desperation. I realized then that the strategic partnerships folder I'd seen in his office wasn't just a list of names, it was a list of people who thought Richard Vance was a man of his word. I had the proof. I had an ally, and for the first time I wasn't the one being fixed. I didn't go home. I couldn't risk my father being there, waiting in the shadows of my apartment complex with more demands or another forged paper. Instead, I drove to a 24-hour diner 3 towns over, a place where the air smelled of burnt coffee and floor wax. I sat in a corner booth with my laptop and the stack of papers Elias had given me. The leverage was no longer just a feeling. It was a file. I spent the next 4 hours doing what I do best, analyzing the structure of a lie. I opened the Strategic Partnerships folder I'd mirrored from my father's office server months ago. At the time, I'd only kept it as a backup of my own work, but now it was a map of his vulnerabilities. My father's business, Vance Holdings, wasn't the monolith he pretended it was. It was a house of cards held together by the perception of his integrity. The 3 major investors, Arthur Sterling, Marcus Thorne, and Alina Vance, a distant cousin with a massive trust, didn't just invest in his projects. They invested in the Vance name. I pulled up the draft of the merger agreement my father had been pushing for months. It was right there in the fine print of Section 4, reputational integrity and moral turpitude. If Richard Vance was found to be involved in legal disputes involving fraud, misappropriation of funds, or actions detrimental to the public trust of the brand, the investors had the right to freeze all capital immediately. He wasn't just trying to give Chloe a wedding. He was trying to prevent a multi-million-dollar margin call. He needed the Highbridge estate to look like a family asset, a sign of his stability, because if the investors realized he was actually hemorrhaging his own cash to keep Chloe afloat, they'd pull the plug. I looked at the server logs Elias had printed. Attempted login, 4:12 p.m. Username, mvance. IP, 192168115 Vance Holdings Corporate Office. Action, backdate contract to Oct 15. Status, DENIED. He had tried to commit digital fraud on a recorded server. He had used his corporate IP address to try and steal a private citizen's contract. I scanned the documents. my bank statement showing the $14,250 wire transfer from my personal savings, the original contract signed by me and Elia's father, and the most damning piece, the email my father had sent to my boss, claiming I had mismanaged family funds. I wasn't just reactive anymore. I was strategic. I began a new document on my laptop. I didn't write a venting letter or a tearful plea. I wrote a technical report. I titled it, Timeline of Ownership and Attempted Unauthorized Access, Highbridge Estate, Deck 12. I attached the PDFs. I included the screenshot of the text he'd sent me asking how much I'd put down, followed by the video clip I'd surreptitiously recorded on my phone during the engagement party, the one where he told 200 people the venue was a gift he had purchased. The leverage was confirmed. It was ironclad. I looked at the clock. 3:00 a.m. In less than 48 hours, the calligrapher was scheduled to mail out the invitations for Chloe's new wedding at the Highbridge estate. My father was planning to send out those envelopes to every important person in his world, effectively making the lie permanent. But I hadn't checked the guest list yet. When I opened the Excel file for the invitations, I realized my father had made a fatal error. He used the same master contact list I'd built for the firm's holiday gala. It didn't just have names and addresses, it had the private email addresses of the board members, the investors, and the city developers. He'd handed me the megaphone. I sat back and watched the sunrise through the diner window. The light was pale and cold, reflecting off the limestone hills in the distance. I felt a strange, quiet calm. My father thought he was the architect of this family, but he'd forgotten that I was the one who drew the blueprints. I knew exactly where the load-bearing walls were, and I knew which one to pull. It was Thursday morning, exactly 24 hours before the calligrapher was set to release the invitations that would broadcast my father's theft to the entire world. I hadn't slept in the diner. I'd spent the night watching the cursor blink on my screen, a small, rhythmic pulse of inevitability. My father was still operating under the delusion that silence meant submission. At 10:15 a.m., he sent me a text. It was short, smug, and carried the weight of a man who thought he'd already won the war. I've instructed the calligrapher to include you on the list. You'll receive an invite to the Highbridge wedding by Saturday. See, I don't hold grudges, Maya. I expect you to be there, smiling for the sake of the merger. Sign the transfer by tonight or don't bother showing up to the office on Monday. Your choice. I looked at the phone. He wasn't even hiding the blackmail anymore. He was so confident in his ability to crush me that he was putting his threats in writing. He thought he was the architect of my career, the one who had provided the infrastructure for my life. He didn't realize that infrastructure is only as strong as its connections, and he had spent years rusting mine. An hour later, my mother left a voicemail. Her voice was high and thin, the sound of a woman who had spent 30 years pretending that fire wasn't hot. Maya, please, just let it go. Your father is so happy today. He's talking about the merger like it's a done deal. He even bought Chloe a vintage pearl necklace to wear for the venue tour tomorrow. If you just sign the papers, we can be a family again. We can have a nice dinner. Don't ruin this for everyone, please, for me. I didn't call her back. I couldn't. For me had always been the code for sacrifice yourself so I don't have to deal with your father's temper. I was done being the human shield. I spent the afternoon doing one last round of due diligence. I called Elias. Is he there? I asked. No, Elias said. I could hear the sound of chairs being moved in the background. But he sent a courier. Another check, another forged letter of intent from you. I told the courier the same thing I told your dad. No signature, no access. He's getting desperate, Maya. He called my father directly an hour ago. My dad told him to talk to me. He hung up on him. He's going to show up tomorrow with the investors anyway, I said. He's banking on you not wanting to make a scene in front of Arthur Sterling. Then he doesn't know me very well, Elias replied. I've got the security logs printed and bound. I've also got the video from the lobby. If he tries to walk in here tomorrow claiming he owns the place, I'm calling the police for trespassing. Are you ready? I'm ready, I said. I went to my email. The draft was sitting there, containing the 47 people who held my father's future in their hands. The 3 main investors, the city developers, the partners at my firm, and the extended family who had spent the last week pitying my financial failure. I thought about the $14,250. It was more than just a deposit. It was 3 years of my life. It was every late night, every skipped meal, and every time I'd told myself that if I just worked hard enough, I could earn my father's respect. I realized now that respect isn't something you earn from people who only see you as a tool. It's something you take back. I typed a final reply to my father's text. You don't have a venue. I didn't wait for him to read it. I moved my cursor to the send button on the mass email. My finger hovered over the trackpad. I thought about the folding chair at the bridal shower. I thought about the way the room went quiet when I walked in. I thought about the scratched label my family had tried to pin on me. I hit send. The progress bar moved slowly, a thin blue line eating its way across the screen. 1 message, 2, 10, 47, messages sent successfully. The clock on my dashboard flipped to 5:00 p.m. The calligrapher's office was closing. My father's tour was in 16 hours. The bomb was in the air. I turned off my phone, tossed it into the passenger seat, and drove to the grocery store. I bought a bottle of wine, 2 steaks, and a box of high-end chocolates. When I got home, Leo was waiting. Is it done? He asked. It's done, I said. Tomorrow the world finds out who Richard Vance really is. And what are we doing tomorrow? I looked at the calendar. December 12th was still months away, but for the first time it felt like my date again. Tomorrow, I said, we go to the park. We take a walk, and we leave our phones at home. The next morning the world didn't end, but the version of it my father had built certainly did. I woke up at 6:00 a.m. without an alarm. The air in our apartment felt different, lighter, as if the walls had finally stopped leaning in. I didn't check my phone. I didn't need to. I knew the digital bomb I'd dropped at 5:00 p.m. the previous day was currently detonating in 47 different inboxes. By 9:00 a.m., the public reversal was no longer a plan. It was a landslide. Richard's tour for the investors was scheduled for 10:00 a.m. at Highbridge Estate. He had planned it as his victory lap, the moment he'd walk Arthur Sterling and the others through the limestone arches and prove he was a man of immense legacy. I arrived at 9:45 a.m. I didn't wear the dark green backdrop dress from the engagement party. I wore my charcoal gray professional suit, the one I wear when I'm defending a structural design to a city board. Elias was waiting by the front doors. He looked at me, then at the black SUV pulling into the long, winding driveway. The lobby is clear, Elias said, and the Wi-Fi is strong. You ready? Let them in, I said. My father hopped out of the SUV before it had even fully stopped. He was beaming, dressed in a tailored navy blazer, gesturing grandly to the estate as Arthur Sterling, Marcus Thorne, and Alina Vance followed him. Chloe was there too, clinging to Arthur's wife's arm, already pointing at the windows where she planned to hang her custom drapes. They walked into the lobby like they owned the air. My father didn't see me at first. He was too busy performing. And here we have the grand foyer, Richard boomed, his voice echoing off the marble. Secured this over a year ago. It took some doing, strategic maneuvering, you understand, but for family you make the impossible happen. Arthur, I think this is the perfect backdrop for our final signing ceremony next month. Arthur Sterling didn't look at the foyer. He was holding his phone in his hand, his face the color of dry parchment. He looked at my father, then he looked at me, standing near the reception desk. "Richard," Arthur said. His voice was quiet, which in his world was far more dangerous than shouting. "I received a very interesting technical report last night, along with several digital attachments." My father's smile didn't fail, it just froze like a building with a cracked foundation. "Arthur, I'm not sure what you're referring to. Spun-up nonsense from a competitor, no doubt. Now if we move toward the ballroom, it wasn't a competitor, Richard." Marcus Thorne stepped forward. He was the most analytical of the group, and he looked disgusted. "It was your daughter. And the server logs from this estate, the ones that show you attempting to backdate a contract from your corporate IP address at 4:12 p.m. last Tuesday." The room went so silent I could hear the hum of the vending machine in the staff hallway. "Maya," my father turned to me, his eyes flashing with a predatory heat I'd seen 1,000 times. He tried to bridge the gap with a laugh, a wet, desperate sound. "You see, this is what I was telling you, Arthur. She's been unwell, highly emotional. She's fabricating documents because she's upset about the wedding logistics. Maya, honey, tell them you were just confused." "I'm an architect, Dad," I said. My voice was steady, clean, and loud enough to reach the rafters. "I don't get confused by contracts, and I don't fabricate server logs. Elias." Elias stepped forward and laid a leather-bound folder on the mahogany counter. He flipped it open to a high-resolution still from the security camera. It was my father, 3 days ago, leaning over this very counter, his face contorted as he tried to slide a check toward Elias. "This is Mr. Vance on Tuesday," Elias told the room. "Attempting to bribe me to alter a private contract held by Maya Vance. When I refused, he threatened to have our liquor license reviewed by his contacts at the city. We have the audio." "That's a lie," Chloe shrieked, her voice cracking. "Dad bought this for me. Maya's just jealous because nobody cares about her wedding." "Chloe, be quiet," my mother whispered, stepping out from behind my father. Her face was white. She looked at the investors, then at the folder on the desk. For the first time in her life, she didn't move to smooth things over. She stayed exactly where she was. "I don't do business with men who rob their own children," Arthur Sterling said. He didn't look at the folder. He looked at my father as if he were a smudge on a window. "The merger is off, Richard. My lawyers will be in touch by noon to discuss the withdrawal of the bridge loan." "Arthur, wait." Richard moved toward him, his hands out, the nice guy mask completely shattered. "You're going to let a disgruntled girl blow up a $30 million deal. She's a subordinate. She's a child. She's the person who provided the only honest paper trail in this room," Elena Vance said, speaking for the first time. She walked over to me and touched my arm. "Nice work on the structural analysis, Maya." It was very thorough. Then the first defection happened. Marcus Thorne's assistant, a young woman who had been taking notes, looked at my father and then at me. She walked over and stood next to Elias. "I've already flagged the IP address for our compliance department," she said quietly. "The fraud attempt is being logged." My father snapped. He didn't see the room anymore. He only saw the girl who had dared to stop being a resource. He lunged toward the desk, pointing a finger at my face. "You think you've won? You've ruined this family. You've burned down everything I built for you. You're nothing without my name. You'll be fired by lunch." "Actually, Richard," a new voice came from the doorway. It was my boss, Sarah Miller, the senior partner of my firm. She was one of the 47 people on the email list. She walked in, her heels echoing like gunshots. "I've spent the morning reviewing the email you sent me about Maya's instability. Given that I now have proof you were using our firm's reputation to cover up a personal fraud attempt, your consulting contract with us is terminated, effective immediately." My father looked around the room. He looked at Arthur, who was walking toward the exit. He looked at Marcus, who was already on his phone. He looked at Sarah, who was staring him down with professional coldness. He turned to my mother. "Helen, tell them she's lying." My mother looked at him. She looked at the folder on the desk. Then she looked at me. For a second, I saw the woman she might have been if she hadn't spent 30 years being his carpet. "She isn't lying, Richard," my mother said. Her voice was small, but it didn't shake. "You told me you'd pay her back. You told me it was for the family, but it was just for you." She turned and walked toward the doors, her footsteps steady on the marble. She didn't wait for him. She didn't look back. Chloe started to cry, not a pretty, silk dress cry, but a loud, ugly realization that her stage had just collapsed. She looked at the empty ballroom, then at me. "You ruined my life," she hissed. "No, Chloe," I said, picking up my folder. "I just stopped paying for it." I walked out of the Highbridge estate. I didn't stay to watch my father scream at the empty air. I didn't stay to hear the final legal threats. I walked into the sunshine, took a deep breath of the mountain air, and for the first time in my life, I felt like the architect of my own soul. I didn't go to work the next Monday. I spent the morning in my kitchen, the sunlight hitting the oak table where Leo had set out 2 mugs of coffee. The silence was different now. It wasn't the heavy, suffocating quiet of a secret being kept. It was the clean, open silence of a house after a storm has passed. The practical fallout was swift. My father's business didn't collapse overnight, but it began to shrink in the way a building does when the central pillar is removed. Without the bridge loan from Arthur Sterling, Vance Holdings had to sell off 3 of its mid-market developments. I heard through the industry grapevine that my father had to let go of his senior staff and move his office from the downtown high-rise to a strip mall in the suburbs. 3 relationships he had spent years protecting were gone. Arthur Sterling never took his calls again. Marcus Thorne moved his entire portfolio to a rival firm, and my mother, the woman who had spent decades as his silent enforcer, moved into a small apartment near the coast. She didn't call me to apologize, not at first, but she did send me a box of my childhood photos, the ones she had kept hidden in the back of the pantry. There was no note, just the images. Chloe's wedding invitations were never mailed. The calligrapher was paid for the work she'd already done, and the rest of the stationery was presumably burned. Her wedding to the fiancé she'd tried to impress with her estate was downsized to a hotel conference room 3 towns away. I wasn't invited, and for the first time in my life, I didn't feel the need to send a gift. Leo and I didn't change our date. December 12th arrived, crisp and clear. We didn't have 200 people. We had 60. The people in the room were chosen family, colleagues who had stood by me, friends who knew the truth, and Elias. He stood at the back of the ballroom, leaning against the same marble pillar where he'd handed me that first cup of bitter coffee. The reception wasn't a performance. There were no raised platforms, no dais, and no forged deeds. We sat at long wooden tables where everyone could see everyone else. The food was served family style, and the laughter wasn't polite, it was real. As the night wound down, I walked out onto the balcony of the Highbridge estate. The valley was dark, the trees dusted with a light frost. I reached into my clutch and pulled out a small, laminated piece of paper. It was the original receipt for the $14,250 deposit. 6 months ago, this paper was a weight. It was the proof of my labor and the target for my father's greed. It represented every hour I'd spent shrinking myself so my sister could be big. But tonight, it was just a piece of paper. I looked at it for a moment, then I folded it neatly and put it back in my bag. I didn't need to frame it. I didn't need to hang it on the wall as a trophy. The venue was mine because I had paid for it, but the life I was building was mine because I had fought for it. I walked back inside, where Leo was waiting for me on the dance floor. The music was low, The candles were flickering, and for once the structure was sound. Looking back, I realized my father was right about one thing. I was an architect, but I wasn't there to build his legacy. I was there to build a door, and then I was there to walk through it. So I have to ask you, if you were sitting at that table and saw that deed sliding toward your sister, would you have set down your fork and walked out, or would you have signed the paper just to keep the peace?